Hi class, this is Professor Barry Brennan. I am going to talk about argumentation today. This will be your basic introduction. This lecture series will probably be about 3 to 4 different videos of this lecture. I'll be using the PowerPoint slide presentation that I've already provided to you. And we'll be looking at defining what is argumentation, how do we understand it, the difference between it and persuasion. Are they different? How are they different? We'll be looking at how to argue ethically. We'll be thinking of argumentation in terms of critical thinking skills. And then we'll be talking about how do we break down what is an argument? What are the components of an argument? Now, I just said all of that, not necessarily in that order, but we're going to get to the PowerPoint and I will begin my lecture now. Again, this is for my argumentation class, and this is Professor Barry Brennan. Okay, here we are. So, an introduction. Here we go. What is argumentation? The process of advancing, examining, and responding to claims primarily through the use of reasoned discourse. So it's the process of advancing, so moving something forward, examining, looking at something, like pulling it apart, making sense of it, and responding to claims primarily through the use of reasoned discourse. This is a pretty hefty definition, and I'm going to break it down a little bit because it's important. The word advance means to move something forward. So we're not going to stay with, when we're arguing, we're trying to have a deeper understanding of something, even though at times you often think of arguing as just trying to be right. It's not really about that. I always like to say in class when people are arguing that, remember, everybody stands in their own right place, and that people have their own, facts can't be disputed, right? Facts can't be disputed. Like scientific facts that can be proven, they can't be disputed, generally speaking. Now there's no really 100% about anything, but generally speaking, scientific facts can't be disputed. Okay, but they can change. I'm going to get off on a tangent, but I'm not going to go there. But the point is, everybody stands in their own right place and they think they're right. That's what argumentation is about. Argumentation is about advancing, so moving something forward and to get a deeper understanding. Examining means we're looking at something, we're pulling it apart, we're trying to see all the pieces to it. And responding to claims, so that's something that someone else has or make it a claim, primarily through the use, so you're putting that first, primarily, and you're also mostly through the use of reasoned discourse. Reason means we're using our minds and our emotions are second. I am not going to be the person that says, well, argumentation, you wouldn't use our emotions at all. That's not really true. We are emotional beings. I don't really believe that. That's not going to come from me. But I will say that it is through reasoned discourse. So the point is to use our critical thinking skills before our emotions. Okay, let's move on. So understanding what argumentation is not. I'm going to move my computer there a little bit. Well, it's not arguing, because arguing is just this like banter back and forth. It's not really what argumentation is. And it's not logic, although the application of logic is part of argumentation, but it is not defined as logic. Okay, it is not the same as debate. Now, you might have argumentation as a part of debate, but debate and argumentation are not the same words. Debate is actually a formal thing that you engage in a very structured, formal situation where there are rules and it's pretty rigid, and there's time that you people take sides and they can only talk for a certain amount of time, and it's pretty rigid. Now, argumentation is not the same as debate. although argumentation, again, is part of the experience of when you're in a debate. It's not the same as persuasion. We're going to talk a little bit about that, of understanding how it differs from persuasion. So what do I mean by that? So persuasion in itself is, we like to think of it as argumentation is prescriptive and persuasion is descriptive. What do I mean by that, right? What does that even mean? Like, what is she talking about? Well, let's just take argumentation, because I think argumentation is pretty specific in the way that you form an argument. It's not as vague as persuasion is. But argumentation is prescriptive, meaning how you build an argument is you have claim, evidence, and your warrant. An argument has basic components. Now, persuasion is the goal of persuasion is to change someone's mind or change someone's behavior or change the status quo. And it can be, when we say descriptive, how it goes about persuading is different. Now, in argumentation, your goal may be to change someone's mind, but the way you go about it is different, and it is very prescriptive. You can't be vague in argumentation. It's very specific in the way that you engage in that process. Persuasion is one-directional, argumentation is interactive. So in argumentation, you're having a back and forth with someone else. You're making a claim, you're providing your evidence and your reasoning behind it, they will respond to that, or they make their claim, evidence, and they respond. It is a back and forth. In persuasion, it's usually, when you think of persuasion, that they have a target. And it isn't so much about how the target responds as it is as how well you try to persuade. That in the study of persuasion, it's about what did they use? What available means did they use in order to persuade? Totally different than argumentation. Persuasion looks at how do people use visual symbols for persuasion? How do they use words? How do they use music? But argumentation doesn't look at that. Argumentation is focused on, generally speaking, the way we're going to study it is how our words and our data and our facts and our reasoning. Persuasion deals more with ethos, pathos, and logos, and argumentation utilizes more logos. Well, that is true, because argumentation, whether you have a good argument, you could be anybody. You don't need to have credibility. There's no ethos. In fact, there's rarely pathos involved. The argumentation, when you engage in argument, it might make you feel something, but good arguments are based on facts and logic and reasoning and evidence. Whereas persuasion, when you engage in like persuasive speaking, what kind of credibility you have, the trust you have with your audience, your ability to appeal to their emotions, and how well you put that whole speech together, that's persuasion. There are a lot of other components involved in persuasion. In argumentation, the basic components are using your reasoning skills, and that includes facts, data, or citing your research correctly, and making a logical argument. Persuasion deals with verbal, non-verbal messages. Argumentation tends to focus only on the verbal. So in this class, we will focus on mostly what is verbally said. However, there's part of it, your delivery of that message is also important. But persuasion does deal with looking at both the verbal and nonverbal. So I'll go back to persuasive speaking. If you've ever taken a Comm 1 class or public speaking class, in persuasive speaking, your body is your instrument. Your voice is your instrument. Your face is your instrument. Your body is your instrument. All of this is part of your persuasive ability. Not just the words that you use or the words that you've written for your speech and then you speak them. It's not just that. It's the whole thing. It is the verbal and nonverbal. In argumentation, we basically look at how well you formed an argument, how well you made that argument. And whether you used, your body or that kind of nonverbal language is not really important, is not really part of the criteria for making a good argument. Okay, where are we at right now? Let's look at this. Okay, let's look at the two approaches to argumentation, and then we're going to stop here and we'll move on to the next thing in the next video. So there's two approaches to argumentation, what we call field invariant and field variant. Now, I want to look at the field variant first, because I think a lot of times that when we talk about arguments, we focus on this, like, what is the context in which this argument is being made? Oftentimes arguments get taken out of context, but they aren't really maybe they're not arguments. Maybe they're not a good argument. Maybe they're really, it's about trying to persuade. But the way we're going to study argumentation is going to be much more field invariant. The context of it's not going to be as important as the argument itself that you're making. How well you make that. Do you use evidence? Is your evidence compelling and credible? Are your sources credible? Did you put that together? Is your argument full of fallacies? Did you pay attention to that? Does it make sense? We won't be thinking about the context of which that argument came from, because that's not going to be really relevant here. It'll really be relevant, how well you put that together. Okay, let's see. We're going to stop there, because the next part we're going to go to is looking at the components of an argument. It has 3 parts, and we're going to be looking at that, and we're going to get straight to that in a minute. Okay, I'll see you in a bit.